Okay, so I guess I will just do a little brief sharing about my testimony. Have y'all seen on YouTube where this artist guy that was drawing on there and people don't really know what he was drawing and everyone's booing because it just looks crazy. And then the last second he turned it around and became this really awesome picture of I think a face and everyone's like, whoa, such talent, such art, such whatever, All the time he was working on it, people were just, what in the world is that? So you hear all the criticism in the back. They're like, how can this person be an artist? To me, I feel like God is very creative, and he always does something that's one up whatever I can imagine. I feel like the only reason that my life is confusing and chaotic was really because while I'm in the middle of my life, I don't see this complete picture that God is weaving in his plan. It wasn't until you kind of turn around, look back 10 years, 20 years, and then you see, wow, how did God weave me in his plan in this tapestry of life? Wow. Yeah, so our God is a God of order, not of chaos. When I look back, now I grew up in San Antonio and in El Barrio, that's the hood for Hispanics. And growing up, so, yeah. Well, I mean, some Mexican. There's still, stuff like enchiladas that I don't like. So I got bullied a lot when I was little. I got picked on because I'm, the only Asian kid. I would wake up in the morning, and I dread going to school. And then I always, come home crying. But that kind of stopped after... that kind of stopped, midway in middle school. That was, when the Hispanics, they really respect, smart people. So midway, that kind of changed. But before that happened, they can be really depressed. So my mom taught me how to pray to Jesus. She would tell me, okay, yeah, there's this Jesus, this God that he'll hear all your sorrows, all your stories, just pour out to him. I grew up, praying to God before I really even know who God is. There's a lot of miraculous stories about how he made himself known in my life that kept me until I was, until now even, that I do believe he exists and he really is for my good. And, he is good. He saved me from a lot of situations. It was kind of suddenly I have a lot of friends, but, oh yeah, that's because the Asian fetish is, oh, this is my Asian, my Chinese friend. Or a China doll, yeah. And then... Or the other side would be this is my smart friend, and then I'm going to tell my teacher that she's my friend, somehow, me being their friend, brings them, more, I don't know, glory or just whatever. But friendship is pretty simple back then. It doesn't really take that much to be called a friend. Meanwhile, I've gone to a lot of vacation Bible school, and, in the summertime with the church. And I prayed the prayer of salvation multiple times. And then every time, people knock on my door, those people that give you a pamphlet, listen about Jesus, invite him in your heart. And I always do that. Nobody ever told me that once you prayed it, you're saved, and you know who God is, Jesus in your life, then you're forgiven and, get a relationship with God. Nobody told me that. And then whenever in church, you're oh, who raised your hand? And I always raise my hand. It wasn't until, I went to UT, where I went for my undergrad. UT, college town, 50,000 students enrolled. Time I was really into internet chatting. Obviously, I don't really have much friends, so all I do is go on the internet and I chat with people. And back then, not everybody has the internet, so there's not a lot of loonies or pedophiles or whatever. So they were actually legit people wanting a conversation because they're also lonely in their home. And so I was telling my net friends, oh, I'm so lonely here in UT. I have nobody here. And someone told me, hey, I know a friend that goes to UT. Here's his number. You can call him, right? And then I got so bored that so around midnight, I was all right, let me call this number. And then, somebody did pick up, and it was a guy. He was hey, are you that person, Arthur? And then he's no. I was uh-oh. I was do you know him? He's oh yeah, he's my brother, because that's the house phone back then. There was no cell phone. Okay, so, yeah, so, and then so I was I'm just bored. I have no friends. and then guess what? He said, Oh, it's all right. You know what? On Friday nights we go to church. You want to come? And I was like, so I started going to Friday night meetings, fellowship, and people that were like, hey, so, like, are you Christian, right? And I was like, yeah, I believe in God. And then I went to the service. I was like, this is awesome. I also served in the choir. And they're like, all the athletes like, oh, are you Christian? I'm like, yeah, I believe in God. All this time, nobody asked, oh, what do you believe? And it wasn't until, like, later on, like, a few months down, they're like, wait a minute, this person doesn't really talk like someone who's churched. Then they're like, oh, hold on, wait a minute. And then before you know it, it's like, okay, you got to talk to the pastor. And, and then so he kind of guided me through, and then he taught, you don't ever have to pray this prayer again. Just do it one more time. And I was like, okay, yes. And I got baptized and got belonged in church. What I was kind of trying to say was how creative God is in bringing me to his people and to himself. So I was like, wow, what kind of a story is that, right? But I mean, imagine if I had if some other random guy picked up the phone, I would be ending up, just on 6th Street and, partying and, So I was like, wow, this is awesome. God is creative. Ever since then, I've been serving, and somehow helping out in the church. Pretty much, probably the recent few years that people started asking me, hey, so, have you ever thought about, going to the seminary? And I was like, I thought it was normal that people ask each other in the church, hey, are you going to seminary? Do you want to go to seminary? But it turned out not really. But to me, it was very normal because people keep asking me that. And then sometime in my life, when I worked a few years, wow, what do I want to do with my life? I'm not married. I haven't bought a house. I don't have kids. I mean, this is a time where I have to be accountable of my time and resources. And what else can I do? I was like, okay, well, if you really want me to go to the seminary, I applied and I got in, and so now I'm almost graduating. I mean, I don't really know what God want me to do, in his plan, but I know that somehow he's watching over me, and so if he want me to do something, I'd be there. So I'm not really worried about that. That's kind of my dependence on God. So in short, really, God is creative.